Now, there are two major issues we are going to canvass for you this morning with my guests, and these are the developments in the media scene since the Akufo-Addo regime began, and also the disturbing issue that has gained international prominence. We saw the BBC reporting as well, and Ghana being placed in, among only one other country as worsening the situation of its environment and putting the lives of its citizens at risk. I'm talking about the rosewood illegal exports, felling and export that is going on. Over 300 million worth of that wood has been exported out of this country using documents that are procured from officials. They don't fake them. They procure them from officials and they go out of this country. So while there is a ban, this is what is going on. How exactly does that happen? All right, so we'll look at all of these, and we'll also be joined by an officer of the Bank of Ghana, a director of the Bank of Ghana. So we look briefly at the matter of the microfinance entities and other financial institutions and what has happened. So I understand that we can begin briefly with that before we go into the other matters that we intend to canvass for you this morning. Thank you very much for joining us from the Bank of Ghana, Elliot Amwako, Deputy Director, Banking Supervision Department. Thank you for joining us, sir. Hello, is Elliot on the line?
Yes, please.
Good.
Thank you.
Right.
For having me.
Right. So yesterday you brought out this information about 23 more microfinance and financial institutions that have been hit by whose licenses have been revoked. This is part of the general cleanup in the sector, not so?
Yes, Samson. Thank you once again for having me. Just as we put out yesterday in a very detailed press release, the licenses of 23 savings and 23 institutions made up of savings and loans and finance houses, and 2 other institutions were revoked.
Right.
This has been part of the general cleanup that we have indicated to the public that we are undertaking.
Is there a reason they were not part of the 386 that you revoked their licenses in June? Was it in June? Yeah.
Yes, and specifically the reasons would be that we have undertaken these exercises in sectors. If you're aware, the financial system, just in terms of the banking system, we have 3 separate subsectors. We have the major banks, and then we have the savings and loans and finance house subsector, and then we have the microfinance subsector. So the earlier exercises had to do with the banks, and then we moved on to the microfinance, and then now we are dealing with the middle tier, which is the savings and loans and finance houses. So that was why they were not part of it, because we were dealing with the separate sectors at the time.
So the biggest reason or the major reason you give is that these institutions are not solvent, correct?
Yes.
Right.
Solvent. They are insolvent, and that is the legal basis for revoking their licenses. For an institution to continue to operate within the banking space, it has to demonstrate adequate capital and solvency and resilience to meet depositors' demands. And once that determination is made that an institution is insolvent, the Act 930 requires that their license be revoked after we are satisfied that no other course of action can resolve their insolvency.
Okay. So in outlining why they are insolvent, first you say that the levels of capital held by some savings and loans companies and finance house companies were in violation of the minimum regulatory capital required by Act 930. This made it precarious for these institutions to continue to undertake the business of specialized deposit-taking institutions, given the risk they pose to their depositors and other counterparties to whom they were exposed directly or indirectly. So this would be the new minimum capital that you set for them, that they are unable to meet, not so?
Not necessarily. In the case of the savings and loans subsector, we have not even changed the new minimum capital. This current level of capital that they are required to hold is what is in existence. In fact, going forward, that is one of the reforms that we might undertake in terms of the appropriate levels of capital that they are required to hold. But this has nothing to do with a new level. It was in relation to the banks that we had a new minimum capital requirement that was applied. But this was the existing. Okay. The existing is not a new requirement. But even without a new requirement, they were unable to meet the level of capital that they are required to pay.
So is the revocation of their licenses the end of the way or of what you have to do about these entities? Because you also say that they used depositors' funds to finance personal or related party projects. This is supposed to be in breach of the law. What will happen?
True. So as we indicated, as part of the process, in revoking their license, we had to appoint a receiver. The receiver would take over these institutions and review all these transactions. Now, in specific cases where people are found to have used funds to fund related party activities, the receiver would have to pursue them and recover these funds. And if cases of criminality are determined, the right course of action will be undertaken.
Okay. When the banking sector got its share, we was the first to face these measures. We were informed that you were investigating even your own officials and that in due course there will be some prosecution. What's happened to that? It's been over a year.
Yes, something as you're aware, investigations can take a very long while if you want to establish culpability. These processes are still ongoing. They are different stages. There's been a lot of civil cases ongoing. There are some criminal proceedings that have been initiated against certain personalities within that space. That process, we can say, is still ongoing. That notwithstanding, we still need to go ahead and clean up the rest of the system.
Ghanaians were expecting that you'll be faster than we now are, being told, because if you had the evidence to indict the institutions and on the basis of which you collapse them, so to speak, then what other evidence are we looking for? That is taking us over a year.
I think it will be better for you to know that evidence that you have to determine that a bank is insolvent because it's unable to meet its regulatory requirements and it's illiquid to meet depositors' demands are different from evidence that you can use to prosecute criminally. That has to undergo certain forensic processes. Okay. So that has to be carefully done, and we need to separate the two. From our side, we are always interested in the fact that is the bank in good standing? Is it able to fulfill its mandate as prescribed? Is it meeting the depositor's interest? If that is done, then we are okay. So sometimes we need to separate these two processes. And as is generally said, I'm not a lawyer, but it says the wheels of justice grind slowly, but they eventually grind. So let's all have confidence in the processes so that due process will be deemed to have been served.
Is it fair when Ghanaians say the Bank of Ghana is also complicit? Because in these releases, you keep telling us about when you discovered some of these irregularities and outright criminal activities. And some of them, it took you over a year to come to the action you now take to revoke licenses. So are people fair when they say the Bank of Ghana is complicit and that it has not been proactive in this regard?
That's an interesting one. Now, just to throw a little bit of light on some of the processes that we need to go through. And when it comes to banking, just the mere determination that an institution is distressed is not the only grounds we consider in taking the ultimate action of revoking a license. Actually, at various stages of the distress, there are actions that are prescribed. And we can say confidently that we have engaged these institutions throughout these processes. Even when a clear determination is made that an institution is insolvent or is not capable of restoring itself, don't forget that because of the interest of depositors, the process of even revoking the license has to be carefully managed so that we achieve an orderly exit of that institution to safeguard the financial space. So, yes, we've indicated in our own release that we've been having engagements with some of these institutions way back 2017, 2018, because we need to go through various options of giving them the opportunity to recapitalize so that then we can save these institutions. It is having exhausted all these processes and we being assured that these institutions on their own will not be able to sustain these institutions. That is when we would come to that determination of revoking a license. Okay. And that is why it's taking us so long. And don't also forget that we've been doing this in phases. So we've spent some time on the banks, we've spent some time on the microfinance institutions, and it's the same resources that we are committing to these exercises, and they have to be carefully planned. Okay. So this is what has been ongoing for the past 2 years, okay. And this is where we are.
Right. No. A major concern of the depositors or those who have invested funds in these institutions has been how they get their monies.
Yes. In relation to this particular one, yes, how they get their money. In our press statement, we have indicated that the receiver had been appointed, and for this particular set of institutions, the receiver is actually going to undertake a validation process. And that is necessary because of the nature of the problems that we found with these institutions. So a validation process has been commenced. So the receiver has put out guidelines for how these depositors must approach them and file their claims, so that once the validation process is completed and it's established that this receiver, this particular depositor is owed so much, then the receiver will take it from there.
The assurance.
So we just urge the public and give them the confidence that this process will be duly followed. So they must follow the instructions of the receiver in this process.
The assurance is that nobody's money will be lost.
I cannot say that 100%, because, and that is why we're carefully saying the receiver must go through a validation process. And we're saying that because of what we've seen with some of these institutions. So we would say that we would allow the receiver to complete his validation process, and then we can come to a determination of whose money will be lost or what is not lost. But the general assurance to depositors is that the receiver will cover them after the validation process has been completed.
Okay. We have known of situations where there has been a liquidation of sort, and what the depositors get in the DKM situation, for example, what the depositors get is solely, what is available. And so the money that is realized as money available is given to them in certain percentages. People have millions lost in the company, but all they get is a few, thousand cedis, because that's all that they can get.
Yes, and once again, I think you could bear me out. For a receivership process, payout will be determined in the hierarchy of claims that are prescribed. And that is what pertains in the DKM situation. The difference between that and the current ones that we've been doing is that with the cooperation of the government has stepped in to provide some funds, which was targeted at depositors, the vulnerable depositors. Okay, and that is the only thing that has allowed the receiver to sort out these depositors without going through the normal hierarchy that we're supposed to go through. So the government kind of has come in to guarantee for those vulnerable depositors. That's why in our press release we made a distinction between these depositors and other creditors.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we have 9 banks, universal banks, whose licenses have been revoked.
True.
347 microfinance companies also licenses revoked.
Yeah.
39 microcredit companies and money lenders gone. 15 savings and loan companies gone. 8 finance house companies also gone. End of the cleanup exercise.
And 2 other institutions.
Yes, non-bank financial institutions, yeah.
The remittance and the leasing companies that were added. In total, close to about 420 institutions, if my math is right.
Yes, so end of the cleanup?
Yes, and that's what has been said, that for the cleanup exercise that we've embarked on, this major one, having done it in sectors, this is the end of that exercise. Going forward, we believe that having taken out this chunk, we would have a cleaner, safer, resilient banking system, which is going to be closely monitored to ensure that this does not happen again.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Elliot Amwako, Director of Banking Supervision at the Bank of Ghana. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Okay. All right. So let me now get back into the studio and engage my guests who are seated. Dr. Charles Reku Brobe is a retired engineer and a very active citizen. Yao Boabeng Asamoah is MP Adentan and Director of Communications of the NPP. Suleiman Ibrahima is Executive Director, Media Foundation for West Africa. And Al-Hassan Suhini is MP Tamale North and member Appointments in Lands and Forestry Committees of Parliament. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Newsfile.
Morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for coming. Any one of you want to spare 2 minutes of comments about the latest and the final in the cleanup in the financial sector? Any one of you? Yes?
I think I would want to spend a little more than 2 minutes.
No, just 2.
No, you have the leadership of the banking regulatory sector having to skirt, I think there's something wrong with my mind, having to skirt a thin line between maintaining confidence in the banking system and cleaning up where they've seen things go wrong.
Right.
So there are questions of trust, there are questions of risk management, and these, I believe, can only be underpinned by demonstrated proceedings in the appropriate institution, which is the court of law. Criminal proceedings, if they are going on, must be publicized. Civil proceedings, if they are going on, must be publicized. And then the impact so far must also be publicized in terms of the stability dividend. We are cleaning up. Have we achieved a stability dividend? I see a stability dividend on 3 levels. Level 1 is that the Bank of Ghana itself, in its last MPC meeting, says that deposit rates are up, capitalization is up, and lending is up. That's what they say. They must publish those figures. Then also,
but that's interesting because they have been running some adverts to seek to encourage members of the public, so they can regain the trust that is lost. And we are told that that is really very massive.
Yes.
Because the savings culture in this country is already bad.
Yes.
And this happens also. So
yes. But in that context, we also need to realize that we are not isolated when it comes to our financial system. We are integrated into the international community, and therefore we are subject to credit rating. And what is going on, the cleanup, is being looked at with eagle eyes from external regulators as well, informally. And that means that if we are still viable in the international market for commercial money, we are borrowing and our bonds are being oversubscribed. We just picked up a cocoa bond, which is being solidly subscribed to, then something is being done right. And that aspect of it must come out to generate more confidence in the Ghanaian that what is being done is proper, and that depositors are truly being protected. The finance minister says over 2.6 million people's deposits have been protected. He said this in Parliament. That's a forum of record. And therefore, the Bank of Ghana is held to that. And we are also being told that over 12 to 14 billion cedis has been pumped in to stabilize the situation. Mr. Elliott just told us now that the government has gone to the extraordinary length of providing funds to override the receiver's order of priority in order to protect vulnerable depositors. So we appear to be on the right track, but we must emphasize the impact dividend. Otherwise, at this point in time, the impression is only created that you are cleaning up for cleaning up's sake, and that doesn't help anybody. Let me also conclude by saying that periodically, worldwide, some of these things do happen. The famous 29 crash of the US is probably the beginning when regulatory authorities and governments realized that these things could happen. And we had the Obama, when he just walked in and had to deal with Freddie Mac and Freddie May, where the subprime mortgages crisis hit America and went right through to the Asian tigers and virtually collapsed the economies in Southeast Asia. So let us focus. Ghana has had its own, the withdrawal of the 50 cedi notes and all that. But let us focus on this and get the regulator, the Bank of Ghana, to be firm about the impact dividend.
Thank you very much.
It's so critical.
Yes, who next wants to comment about this? And if I may ask, because there are those who feel that there could have been different approaches that could mean that not all of these would go down, because some apparently, and we know some have gone to court and shown somewhat and have made some victories also to show that if they had been given some small opportunity, they would not have been collapsed, and the jobs that were lost would not be lost, and the expenses that the taxpayer has had to be, handed will not have happened.
Well, in fact, Samson, you have just almost taken the wind out of my sail. That is the point that I intended to make. But I think it is also important in this discussion to remember and show some level of sympathy to those who, as a result of these measures, are going to be jobless and will still have to, meet the harsh economic conditions that we are all already, going through. I hope that they will be able to pick themselves up and find other alternatives, other alternative ways of catering for their families and their, economic needs that they will be required to settle. And again, even though there are reports that suggest that some of these entrepreneurs who set up these companies may have misconducted themselves in some way, it is appropriate to also show some concern, and because not all of them may have fallen foul of some of these things. And so it's important that we show some concern, some solidarity, and hope that they will be able to pick themselves up, dust themselves, and do something that will eventually, continue to contribute to the economy. But
so, like I said, in the banking issues, some of them are in court fighting this. And in this situation also, you can be sure that some of them will fight it, because Dr. Nduom, for example, has issued a statement categorically denying the claims about transferring huge amounts of funds belonging to depositors to another institution belonging to his group in the US without due process. He says every documentation in the transfer exists at the Bank of Ghana, and that the government owes it so much, is it 2.2 billion, and that if that money was available to the GN savings, it was a bank, and then it survived the collapse and became a savings, and now it's gone. So people will sue.
So that is what brings us to the question of the how. The how. I mean, everybody knows that there was a need for us to clean our banking system, but reforms are not synonymous to closure. I mean, some people tend to make the point to seem as if there was a call for us to reform our banking institution or our financial institution, it meant that we needed to just close those banks. But reforms are not synonymous to closure. Okay. And so it raises the question of whether the how it is done is the best way that we could have carried out this whole exercise. And the cost at which it is done is also important, that even as we agree that there was a need and there still is a need to reform our financial institution, the way we have gone about it and the cost at which we are doing it, is that really, the most ideal, way that we could have approached this? I don't think it is. I believe that there are better ways that we could have done this, especially with some of these, issues that are raised by the owners. I remember the Unibank case, and the fact that government is not denying in most of these claims that they owe these institutions, and making the point that if they paid the amount that they owed, maybe those banks wouldn't have had to be collapsed. The government is not speaking about that, but government is rather highlighting how much it is costing us to collapse these banks. I mean, what about how much it would have cost us to pay these banks, to let them remain solvent and keep their workers? Those are some of the issues that I think.
Yes, who next? Who wants to? Yes.
Maybe a quick one.
Yes, Sule.
Of course, it's a very, very worrying development, given the jobs at stake and all of that. And the last time, the banks were consolidated, we were told how much the government had to put in. And anytime they talk about government having to do something, it's about your money and my money. Basically, that is perhaps the other way of saying it. It's not about government, it's about the people's money that was used to do that. But for me, what is worrying is that all these are happening, and so far we haven't had a situation where somebody is faulted at the Bank of Ghana for not doing their job.
They say the
when
investigations
you
are going
asked Elliot, in fact, the very last words he used were that when you asked whether this is the end, he said yes, and we would ensure that those operating are closely monitored to ensure that this does not happen again. And for me, that is self-indicting, to say that, well, it happened because we did not closely monitor them. If you say that Dr. Nduom's GN savings and loans transferred, over what, $60-something million out of the country, hundreds of thousands of pounds out of the country, and we had a banking supervision division,
which
and this could, yes, which he denies, but assuming it is true because it's coming from the Bank of Ghana, assuming it is true, how was it done that this was not detected? That we are in a country where a bank can just transfer millions of dollars out of the country, and we have a supervision division of the Bank of Ghana, nothing happens, and the only thing we get to know is, well, these things have happened and then we are shutting you down. I think it's a very, very worrying development, and the people who must have ensured that this didn't happen perhaps should have questions to answer.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Charles Rekurobi, you want to say something about this briefly?
Very, very brief.
Okay.
First of all, we seem to always shut the stable door after the horse has bolted. Here we are, we have a Bank of Ghana which has got a supervision division. Presumably, it is supposed to be a sustained supervision. All these companies are supposed to submit regular returns of their activities, which are supposed to be checked. And it seems as if all the fine rules that we have are always stepped aside, largely because of cronyism and exceptionalism. And really, until we begin to take to task those who we entrust to make sure things are done properly, we're going to get into this mess all the time. Isn't it interesting that some of the banks operating here, which have got external supervision, are not running into these problems? But it's only the local banks who we seek to support, that run into these problems where they are not properly supervised, where they are cronies, they are church members, they are what? And
or is it the case that some of these internationally reputed banks you talk about who have founding and shareholders out of the country may have issues, but they are resolvable. And resolving them does not amount to collapsing them. That's why they are still there.
Well, I'm sure every bank has got an issue, but the point we are talking about is solvency and meeting the targets.
Okay.
So let's stick to that. And clearly, there's poor supervision. Clearly, nobody is being held responsible. And it sends a very bad signal that anything can happen. You know, I'm old enough to remember from 1966 what went wrong. We've been doing all these things of trying to find out what went wrong after the fact. You said Domelevo has been given a prize. It's after the fact. We're supposed to have internal auditors who should preempt a lot of these things. But it's still going on. So I think we should really squarely accept the fact that this country, all the people we train and entrust to ensure that things are done properly, are not doing so because they are protecting their friends.
All right. Thank you very much. And then we will now get into our discussion about the media. Now, but before that, let me read this brief statement by Dr. Papakwesi Nduom. He says that the information about International Business Solutions is false. International Business Solutions has two main business lines: management consulting and import-export. All the funds mentioned are comprised of payments of invoices for goods and services that were rendered in Ghana. To use it as justification for any regulatory action is either gross negligence on the part of the Bank of Ghana or egregious misrepresentation of the truth designed to drag our name in the mud. The Bank of Ghana has all the documents for every pesewa transferred out of Ghana, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with engaging in an international business. The real scandal is the 2.2 billion CD portfolio that the Ministry of Finance has held hostage for over 2 years. Their refusal to acknowledge and pay these debts has collapsed a strong Ghanaian company. Signed, Dr. Papakwesi Nduom. Of course, he's indicated that in the course of the week, there will be some formal communication about the steps that they intend to take. Now.